Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, my name is Gerard, and welcome to another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America, the program that asks, what if we took one of St. Paul's letters and changed the name on it, as if it was sent to America? Each program we talk about the two things people often say never to talk about in the same context or same breath, religion and politics. The objective is to explore how matters of faith fit in society and how to balance the interests of government and religious beliefs. And we do this in a way where we speak with love and kindness under the light of truth. And for that truth, we look to the writings of St. Paul to show us the way. And in this program, what we're going to do is we're going to look at an issue that has exploded in recent years. In fact, it has caught many off guard by the speed of its pace of growth. And we're going to ask why this is taking place, or perhaps how we should perhaps address it. What would Paul actually say about it? If he were here today, what could he tell us about how to deal with this particular issue? And this hot button issue that we're going to talk about is transgenderism. And there's a writing from St. Paul that I thought would apply. It's a letter he wrote to the Ephesians. And in it, actually, before we do that, I'm forgetting myself. Before we do that, I need to announce that we have a guest on this particular program. His name is Jeff. Jeff is a creative Catholic. Jeff and his brother both attended a high school seminary. Jeff has done over the years, he's been engaged in a great many different apostolic works, a great many apostolic ministries. He's worked with the homeless, Big Brothers, autistic kids. At one point, he received a medal from John Paul II to continue work in such fields as prison ministry. Jeff has also worked in these ministry efforts with people who are either lesbian or homosexual or transgenders. And so I thought it would be appropriate. He's a good friend of mine, and I asked him, and he kindly agreed to be on our show today. Jeff, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
What I wanted to start off with was a reading. This comes from a letter that St. Paul originally wrote to the Ephesians. And so if, in fact, it was written to Americans today, the question is, can we glean out of it something that may help us address this issue of how we should approach the trends in our society, the demands, the efforts in our society to accept, I guess perhaps that's the best way of putting it, the trends calling on us to accept transgenderism. And Paul writes, brothers and sisters, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing in the heavens, as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world to be holy and without blemish before him. In love, he destined us for adoption to himself through Jesus Christ, in accord with the favor of his will, for the praise of the glory of his grace that he granted us in the Beloved. In him, we were also chosen, destined in accord with the purpose of the one who accomplishes all things according to the intention of his will, so that we might exist for the praise of his glory, we who first hoped in Christ. Now, Jeff, I think when I first told you about this idea, to use this particular reading in the context of the current societal issue dealing with transgenderism, you probably were like scratching your head a little bit. How does this work? But I don't know. To me, it just speaks in a huge way to the value of each person. That if we understood ourselves as people who are destined for the creation of the world to be adopted children of God, that might in some way shape how we think about ourselves and this issue. Part of what I was thinking was that, and as we'll discuss later, because in preparing for the show, I did some research, and what I came across was, I think, something that supports this contention of mine, that a lot of people who are going through these types of issues wonder about who they are. You know, they have questions, they have doubts, they have confusion. Gender dysphoria, I think, is, it's another term that I'm not going to do this justice. It's defined in part as someone who consistently and insistently expresses doubts about who they are. There's a third piece to that, and consistently, insistently, there's a third piece I'm not remembering. But basically someone who expresses, a desire to be other than the biologic, sex that they are, or that they have some kind of doubts about their sexuality. So there's confusion. And if we understood ourselves as being created by God, that takes the pressure off of us to decide who we are. And if that's in fact the truth, because we started off by saying that we're going to speak, and I think that the mission of good Catholics is to speak to others, to approach this or any other societal issue with love and kindness under the light of truth. And we need to look to readings such as St. Paul for those truths. And he's telling us we are adopted, we were destined, through simply the gift and mercy of God. He decided that we were going to be adopted children of his, and he designed this before the foundation of the world. That just seems like it throws a whole different light on this issue that maybe some people are dealing with. I don't know. That was what I'm thinking about this. And it's funny to me as well that there are so many people in the world today that feel, I guess in some sense, influenced to accept this. And don't get me wrong, there's never any reason to discriminate against anybody. There is never any reason to deal with another human being other than with love. If we're doing anything other than that, then we're not following Christ. However, there's also this aspect of truth. Is it truthful to believe that we can decide who we are? After all, this transgender movement that we are living in the midst of today was begun, or had its roots, in the 1950s. There was a professor at Johns Hopkins University. His name is John Money. And he is universally credited with coining the terms gender identity. And also, I believe the other term he coined was gender role. And by those terms, he meant this. Gender identity meant our inner sense of who we are in a sexual context. Are we a boy? Are we a girl? We have our own inner sense of that. And then gender role referred to what society expected us to be. So if you're a boy, you've got to do certain, boy-like or man-like things. And if you're a girl, et cetera. And that these notions, whether they're, on our inside or they come from the outside, that's what they are. They're notions. They're ideas. And if they're simply ideas, well, we can change them. We can decide who we want to be. And so the question then is that the truth? Is that the truth? And if Paul is right, that we were designed before the creation of the world to be children of God. Now, some people might say, well, you can be a child of God, and you can, you can be born biologically this and change to that. That doesn't, change the fact that you're still perhaps a child of God. As a matter of fact, that is the belief of the Anglican Church. They want to welcome anybody into the body of Christ, if they're transgender or not. They're open to transgender marriage. They're open to transgender people being ordained. They support overtures, legislative proposals, governmental regulations, proposals in terms of governmental regulations and things like that, which allow people to self-identify in a legal context. And just recently, they published a directive to all their parishes, which called for celebrations of somebody identifying as a sex other than they are biologically, or other than they were born biologically. And they do this in the context of a baptismal ceremony. And so they're changing their baptismal ceremony to allow celebrations of somebody making a choice in that regard. And of course, that's not without controversy, because, for example, there's one lay person who's a member of their general synod who thought it was, quote, a devastating trajectory towards an outright denial of God and his word. The point of baptism is to identify a person with Jesus as they begin a life of following him. Using an affirmation of baptism to celebrate a gender transition turns this upside down by encouraging people to follow their own feelings and live in identities contrary to how God created them. So, at least some people are of the mindset that this idea that we can decide who we are may in fact run counter to what was decided for us by God. Now, Jeff, you've worked with some people, haven't you?
Yeah, I've actually, there's been many times in moving around and I guess those geographical areas where I've lived with many friends that have been in areas that have been prominent transgender, prominent gay and lesbian, and a lot of different community situations. And I've spent a lot of time with some of them, a lot of one-on-one. And as a Catholic, I try to meet them with a lot of love and compassion and try to understand. And in the aspect of Paul, I understand that we're all in the body of Christ, and we're inherited to be with Jesus and to follow his way and imitate him. And on all possibility, I also realize that sometimes those gifts that we get can look on the other side and see that, well, maybe there's something better out there, or I know there's something better. So a lot of the individuals I talk to are usually coming from a broken home or a military background where they've gone through a lot of post-stress and are trying to make a change and try to identify with another aspect where when we look at the light of Paul, I understand that sometimes being Catholic and sometimes being acceptance of what God has given you, we get those thorns, so to speak, that Paul had. We don't really know what that thorn is, which is probably a blessing. We don't know what his mindset was. I noticed a lot of I struggle with alcoholism, so I'd love to be able to, drink and enjoy, but I have to accept that thorn. And some of my friends I talk to where they have a hard time with their gender identity, they could learn to accept or become closer to God and learn some of the teachings and imitate it, not just experientially, so to speak, I would try to say. They've had issues where they started to pray, reading some of the saints, especially Paul, to develop an acceptance of their being.
Sure. It's a frequent, contention of mine that when we see something in the writings of St. Paul that we think is true, if we can find a connection to it with other things, then that's just one more indication that perhaps we're on the right track in thinking that it's true. And that goes for all the scripture and all of Catholic theology. To me, what's so amazing about Catholic theology is so many things tied together. You can explore one thing, go down a certain path and explore a particular issue, and then after you go down in the road with that for a while, then you'll find it connects to something else. And it just, whenever that happens, it just always amazes me how so much of the Catholic faith and the theology behind the Catholic faith connects with other things in a consistent way. I mean, there's been 2,000 years of our theology, and there's probably more opportunities for things to become disunited rather than united. But you can still find this tremendous consistency. And as you were talking, one thing I thought of was St. Augustine. St. Augustine. I mean, it's probably the most quoted line from St. Augustine, where he says, what? Our souls are going to be restless
until they rest within you. And I think that's, and as I'm thinking right now of the transgender and many others that are making decisions, we all have an emptiness. And I believe what they're trying to do and what I'm trying to do, we all try to do, we want to be happy. So we're finding many, many different avenues, whether it's changing your sexual preference or your gender preference, or you name your own demon and your own passion that you think you need to put in place of God. And it isn't until you really pursue and become comfortable in God's hands. Many of the individuals I know have tried so many avenues, and once they've got on those hormones to change their gender, I have not met any that have been happier. And then sometimes I've even met a couple that have been even more depressed, gone through great depression. So now not only are they hormones, now they're on antidepressants and mood alteration drugs, and so I think it's really this. It comes down to that true saying that we will only be happy until we rest in your hands, God, and we try to years and years, especially through the secular culture, where we're always getting these stimuluses. This is going to make you happy. This will fulfill your life. Try A, B, C, D, and you'll be happier. And it just turns out to where you have to surrender to that divine flow, which is in all of us, to God's love, and realize, I carry that cross, so to speak. And we hear that too, carry the cross, whatever your cross is. And those are progresses and struggles that we all deal with. And sometimes we live in a culture, especially in this country, where we believe we have the right to happiness. And it doesn't always fulfill that.
Yeah, it's the word that came to my mind. It's not a virtue, but word is peace. Peace. I mean, we are, and I think it's also connected with fear. So, why did St. Augustine say what he said? When we're restless, are we not afraid of something? People that are unsure, I'd be happier if maybe part of it is, okay, I'm not going to be accepted as a boy, or I'm not going to be. Maybe there's some kind of a fear that's involved in this fear of not being accepted, fear of not being able to live up to the standards. I mean, as I said, John Money talked about, okay, well, gender role. There are gender roles, and society says, or society used to say, you had to fulfill these roles. If you are a boy, you had to like, boyish activities. And there's a friend of mine I knew who describes herself, I know her. Anyways, she describes herself as, I guess, a prototypical tomboy. Dolls, dresses. Forget it. She wanted to go out with the boys and, whatever, whether it was sports or fishing, hunting, all that kind of stuff. She loved that kind of stuff. But she never felt any doubt about her own sexual identity. But nevertheless, society puts these, or did, and to some extent I'm sure still does, it puts these pressures on people to act in certain ways. So perhaps there's a fear that you're not going to be able to live up to that. So you become restless. But if you just simply instead allowed yourself to feel some inner peace, which brings me back again to this letter from St. Paul. How many times have we heard a reading like this at Mass? Where St. Paul says, destined to be children of God without blemish, destined before the foundation of the world. How many people sit at Mass and they hear that and they think, that's nice. Those are pretty words. They sound real good. But okay. And then the reading's over and you move on to something, and your mind shifts to something else. When do you sit down after Mass with a reading like this, and just think about it? And if you allowed yourself to just sort of think at it for 5 or 10 minutes, so that the notion might actually enter your head that this could really be true. And then after that, at some point, if you actually allow yourself to believe this, and if you happen to be a person that's going through some type of gender questioning, would it perhaps not be the case where you might feel a little more peace in your heart, maybe a little bit less fear of living up to somebody else's idea of what you ought to be, if in fact you knew, okay, God's accepting you. God's accepting you.
That's true. I was listening to Ron Rollhauser, and during a comment, this has to kind of plays into what we're talking about, but I feel a lot of the individuals that are struggling with especially transgender, are struggling with that meta-narrative and the hope that what's in the future. And as we're talking about that reading, to believe that we're children of God and there's a place for us and happiness, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and we don't really see that hope, that meta-narrative that's going to happen, we decide that, well, I want to get what I want right now in order for me to be happy, without putting it off or abstaining or learning a new way of thinking, or maybe some discipline or obedience to God's plan or whatever that may be, because we're all on a pilgrimage to get to heaven. But when you tell someone that or try to explain it, it's something that's very, very hard to sink in, to adapt to, and to understand, and to try to find your purpose in that role, and to getting there and become children of God, and enjoying our brother and imitating what Jesus did to the best of our ability, to carry that cross and to follow God's plan, and that we are beloveds.
It's not a small idea. You say it's not so easy to get somebody to believe that or accept that notion. It is not a small idea to think that, okay, me, you, everybody, before the creation, that we were in the, God's eye before the creation of the universe. Seriously? It's a little bit hard for us to get our mental, faculties around. So.
And, I think if it were easy, everyone would do it. It's one of those battles, it's a wonderful pilgrimage, and it's a wonderful journey to understand God's divine plan. And I know in my life, and I've talked to others that have gotten to that point where they have that purity of intention, like our church fathers talked about, and like Paul talked about. Purity of intention, to always have an honest heart, a loving, caring heart, and to rely on God in each precious moment. Those are wonderful goals, and it's a wonderful journey.
Oh, yeah. And when you allow yourself to experience all that, when you open yourself up to that, I think, and it's been said before too, that you have to love yourself before you can really extend yourself to love other people. So, I think you need to have a little bit of this inner peace that we're talking about. You need to listen to this message from St. Paul, believe it, accept it. Once you do, you'll be so much more able to extend some love to some other people. And when you do, they're going to return it. They're going to feel better. You're going to feel better for giving it. This whole idea, okay, if things are true, then they'll connect to other things that are true. Another way of saying that is, okay, bad things produce more bad things, and good things produce more good things. And I think what we're just talking about is, you feel the peace, you believe this message from St. Paul, you extend love to other people, they return it, good begetting more good. This is not something new.
It really isn't. Like I mentioned, the church fathers, Paul's teaching. We always remember, Jesus himself was even driven out to the desert, if we read the Bible correctly. I think sometimes we're tested. But what we're forgetting, though, is instead of blaming God or thinking there isn't a God, I don't think we realize it. In my life, from my experience, is God's actually been beside me the whole time, the whole way. He doesn't send anybody there. He actually experiences the journey. And if you practice the continual presence of God, you're able to understand and adapt and understand that hope and what Paul's talking about how really it's just a family machine in a way, the covenant making to be a part of God's family, and even with all my character defects that I have and all my other friends have, it seems to be making they work for the better, meant to make our relationships with each other grow and blossom. We can learn from each other.
I love you talk about, all of your many defects, because I got to tell we are our own worst critics. I say some of the things, I say things about myself all the time in some other kind of way, but, I remember when I first met you, that, what I understood from you and the message that you were giving at the time, I thought you were the greatest, one of the greatest people I've met. So we can be our own worst critics, and I'm sure you understand that as well. But for those of you listening, don't believe everything he's telling you. but anyway, the other thing is, I said, okay, so good begets good, bad begets bad. Correct. Okay, so what about if we don't accept this message from Paul? If we think perhaps God did not design things for us, and we can design things for ourselves, does that produce bad things? I mean, there's a couple of cases, and you can take a case, and maybe it's in isolation, maybe it's out of context, maybe it doesn't necessarily, support exactly what you think it supports. But nevertheless, I'm going to talk about this one particular case. Comes out of Texas, where there's a woman who is suing her husband, or ex-husband perhaps. I don't know if they're still married or just separated. But anyways, they're in a custody fight. And the issue in this custody fight is that the husband wants to dress their son, I think he's 6 years old, their son as a boy. And the wife doesn't agree with that. Well, the wife is, I don't know, I think she's a psychologist. Anyways, she has diagnosed the son as having gender dysphoria. And as I said before, that means consistently saying you feel more comfortable in another gender role, or gender identity, or, maybe it's enough to say that you simply express doubts about it. I don't know. But anyways, she diagnosed the son as having gender dysphoria. Husband doesn't go along with this. So she's suing. She has already obtained an order from the court directing the husband not to dress the boy as a boy. Now, there's a therapist that was appointed by the court to be involved. That therapist found that when the boy is in the presence of the mother, he identifies as a girl. When the boy is in the presence of the father, he identifies as a boy. So one of the legs of this definition seems to be missing. Consistently, exhibits a certain trait. Well, he's not consistent. And so the question then is this child something of a ping pong ball between the parents? And is this child perhaps, going to suffer psychological problems later? Because on the one hand, he's, one parent telling him he ought to be something, and on another hand, another parent who doesn't agree with that. Yeah, what are we doing? What are we doing to our kids? So the thing about it, however, is that the parents are fighting one another over this, and they're getting court orders against each other over this. There is, to some measure, we got to be careful about what you assume with regard to certain cases. But on some level, it seems like we should be able to conclude there's some amount of disagreement, perhaps hostility between the parents. This idea that, good begets good, bad begets bad. Is there anger perhaps involved here? Or is there, or have these people at least created a condition where they can get angry? If they're not angry now, they're going to get angry later with each other. And it's more than just, for example, in that one case, a lot of people who were social progressives a few years back are now regarded as bigots. And they are treated with a certain amount of antipathy, and they can complain about this. And there are cases I can mention, and I probably will in a minute, but this just seems to be what goes on here. It's part and parcel of denying God's plan. Involves a certain amount. I mean, it seems like it's bound to create a certain amount of inner turmoil, and from that inner turmoil, then you can get anger, hostility, actions against other people that are not based in love. I mean, it just seems to me. I mean, for example, there's a there's a case where there's a woman. Her name is Megan Murphy, prominent feminist. She has recently been permanently banned from Twitter. Permanently banned from Twitter. Now, what was her serious offense? She tweeted, "Women aren't men." That was one. There were two, but that was one out of the two. Women aren't men. The other one, how are trans women not men? What is the difference between a man and a trans woman? And for that, she was regarded as a TERF, T-E-R-F. A TERF is a trans exclusionary radical feminist. So for that reason, she was blacklisted from Twitter. Now, again, she was a very prominent feminist, someone fighting against discrimination, someone fighting for the rights of women, for equal treatment for women. But now she is branded as somebody who is completely out of step with our culture. She's backward. She's a bigot, in some sense. So this is what she's undergoing. And she said, in response to this, that it is our ability to debate important issues and speak the truth in the public realm that's important. She said it's time for all of us, not just women and feminists, who are now taking the worst of it, her words, to put their collective foot down and demand a return to sanity. She's experiencing ostracism. She's being, banned, and she's being called, I guess, a term you would like to be called, a TERF. She's being put down in a way, and she doesn't like it, and simply wants the ability to talk about it and be able to talk openly and freely about it. So, now I guess we can add another one to the list besides just, maybe anger and having not having peace of mind and so on. Now we can add repression. We have to repress stuff. If you don't agree with us, perhaps is there fear that maybe we don't have the truth? Maybe we're not expressing the truth, and out of that fear then comes the need to repress. I mean, it just seems to me that when you look at things, the more angles from which you look at this, you can, at least to me, and if somebody can argue against this and show me I'm wrong, great, love to hear it. But for right now, it just seems to me that it looks like the more angles that you look at this, the more you keep coming up with the same thing, which is that we do have a meaning, a purpose, a value that was given to us by God. And when we deny it, when we fight it, resist it, run up against it, when we continually do that, what happens? We end up becoming fearful. We end up maybe exhibiting hostile or repressive tendencies. It just adds up to the same picture to me over and over again. And it's just interesting to me to look at societal issues like this through the prism of St. Paul. Why not? Why not? I mean, nowadays we're told keep religion out of the public sphere. You can have religion, keep it in private. And my way of thinking, no, we need more religion. We need to look at things through a religious lens. And why? Because it's the truth. If it's not the truth, show me, prove to me, demonstrate to me that it's not the truth. This is a little bit off base, but I always love the argument from C.S. Lewis. you know, I forget I'm going to call it the argument of threes. And somebody, I know there's a term for this argument, but anyways, you know, who is Jesus? In answer to the question, who is Jesus? Well, he can only be three things. He cannot just simply be a good, wise man. That is not one of the three possibilities. Because why? Because he claimed he was God. Anybody who claims he's God can't simply be a good person. So, what is he? Well, he's either a liar, you know, he's a mean-spirited, ill-intentioned liar, or he's psychotic, he's delusional, some kind of it's a pejorative term, but in that case. Or what's the third? What is the third alternative? What could the third alternative be? So, you know, you answer me that question, because if it's not the first two, and it is the third, then in fact, he's telling the truth, that he is God. Okay, then how is it wrong to look at things through a religious lens? I mean, please. You know, like for example, another example, this is a guy, his name is Jonathan Best. Now, Jonathan's got an interesting story. Jonathan was the director in 2007 in Manchester, England, for something called the Queers Up North Festival. And they promoted, to a large extent, lesbian, gay issues, also friends to transgenders, the LGBTQ community. Anyways, he got into trouble himself because he invited a particular singer who was accused of supporting lesbian causes, but not supporting transgender causes. Now, whether or not the accusation was true or not, I'm not exactly sure, but nevertheless, he was accused of that. And so he wrote some very, very interesting things. At one point, he talked to a friend of his, and he said of his friend of his that she supported the principle that each of us should be free to define ourselves as we wish. That is what this is about. Freedom to define ourselves as we wish. Now, there's a virtue and a vice, but you know, peace is not necessarily a virtue or a vice, but this one is pride. Pride, and then the virtue, of course, is humility. The ability to, all of us, each of us should be free to define ourselves as we wish. Okay, not exactly humble. And we can get a whole long discussion as to how many good things come from being humble versus, you know, the opposite, but in any event. Also, Mr. Best says that his friend has said, free to define ourselves as we wish. Those women who choose to make a distinction between natal women and trans women should be able to do so without being demonized. Again, the anger angle. You know, what he found was that the transgender community was taking a position that if you don't think trans women are real women, that's transphobic. And the problem that he had with this was on two fronts. First, he said that definition of being a transphobe didn't require any negative view of trans people. You could easily have no ill will towards them, but from an intellectual perspective, you simply didn't think that they're the same. If you wanted to examine that issue, if you wanted to talk about that concept, you should be able to do that without being regarded as a transphobe. So even if you had no view, you were still going to be ostracized. Secondly, he said that this prioritized in his mind, this prioritized the views of trans women over other women. And he said, why should feminists engage in their own civil rights struggle, be forced to redraw their definition of a woman to include trans women? There was somebody else that he engaged in this discussion with, a woman by the name of Sarah Brown. She took the opposite view. And the way that ended up, he said, we didn't so much agree to disagree. has abandoned the conversation. Couldn't have a conversation. Could not have a conversation. You know. So you know, this is just some of what he said. You know, he also thought the best way to evaluate new ideas is to explore them critically and freely. Instead of open, respectful discussion, today's trans activism too often seeks to prevent women from discussing the issues in trans ideology which directly affects their lives. And he asked, this, I like this part. He asked, why is this happening? That question, why? That was one that, you know, that's the same question I had. I think I mentioned this when we started the program. Why is this happening? Why so fast? Why so sudden? Why so strident? Why are so many people, you know, so demanding that everybody agree with a certain view now, without even discussing it? He said, how have we reached, in his words, this degraded state of affairs in which members of one marginalized group try to prevent another from talking? So repression, we can add that to our laundry list of some of the ill effects of denying this great gift. You know, the fact that we have some design, some purpose, some connection with a real God. I guess before we leave this topic, one thing I think any mention of this topic, any discussion of this topic, is not going to be complete, and certainly we can't even approach any measure of being complete in the time that we have allotted. But nevertheless, any effort at being complete is not going to succeed without mentioning how this all got started. You know, like I said, why? Well, if we look historically to why, we go back to this guy, John Money, professor at Johns Hopkins University back in the 1950s. People have heard of the Kinsey Report, Professor Kinsey, Masters and Johnson. Kinsey was also at Johns Hopkins in the 50s, and I believe Masters and Johnson had a connection there as well of some sort. In any event, John Money was a contemporary of theirs, and he, as I say, started this whole idea that there is such a thing as a gender identity and gender role. He coined these terms. And if we're talking about the idea of being perhaps repressive, if we're talking about the idea of perhaps being prideful and not humble, it might be interesting to go, there's a book that was written about Professor Money. The book was entitled The Man Who Invented Gender by Terry Gold. That's what Money's credited with. He's the man who invented gender. And Mr. Goldie writes that in fact, Money, he said, Money certainly considered himself to be the source of the concept of gender. Interesting. I would have thought gender and sex would have been a long-standing, may have existed before the 1950s, but of course it's this concept of gender that's new, that gender is something we can decide. And he considered himself to be the source of that. And again, in Goldie's words, Money's invention reflects the power and even arrogance of his approach to science. He tended to assume his own originality, or at least innovation, in every endeavor. Says that Money did not suffer disagreement well, and was often verbally abusive in response. And then another aspect, apparently, of his work was the fact that he didn't base a lot of it on science. Very limited number of patients that he dealt with directly, very limited clinical data. But without having much clinical data, in Goldie's words, he was still very ready to make general theories. And he created arguments that go beyond what the evidence can justify, again, in Goldie's words. But another thing, Money apparently, according to Goldie, seldom referred to the work of others. But when he did refer to a colleague, it was often to attack. And this, Goldie says, however, that sexology would have been a very different field without Money. To become what it has become required his intelligence and imagination, as well as his arrogance and often, quote, extraordinary hubris. So the man who invented what we now understand to be sexology apparently had these traits, according to this one author. Now, should we believe that? Well, there is a very famous case. Matter of fact, it was a case that really was a source of, well, money losing a great deal of the reputation he previously enjoyed after many, many years. There was a case of a certain man named, it was originally named Bruce Reimer. Bruce Reimer was born in August of 1965, and he had a physical problem, which the doctors thought to fix it, he needed to have a circumcision. So they performed a circumcision, but it was a bad one, and it went awry. And as a result, he was left misfigured. So his parents, not knowing what to do, but hearing about John Money on TV, decided to consult Mr. Money. Mr. Money's recommendation was that the parents raise the child as a boy. So his sexual organ, his male sexual organ, was removed. He underwent a sex change operation. Maybe not right away, but when he was reaching puberty, he was given estrogen and female hormones, underwent hormone treatment. And since this all started when he was very young, and the decision to raise him as a girl occurred while he was still very young, he didn't remember this. As a fact, his parents never told him that he was born a boy until he was 15 years old. Now, the other very interesting thing about Mr. Reimer, he was a twin. He was a twin. He had a brother. And Money's theory is that gender, or gender identity, original term gender identity, shortened it to gender. The gender is simply a function of our inner sense. And we can change it if we want. And that, a gender role is simply the function of societal norms, the culture's norms, and we can change those if we want. That theory could be proven in this case like no other. Supposing you had two people born boys, two twins, born at the same time from the same parents, one being raised as a girl, one being raised as a boy. If they both turned out fine, that would prove this theory. It was a shining example for Mr. Money, at least for a number of years. It was used actually as justifications for thousands of sex change operations. Well, there's a bit of a problem. When the boy didn't like going to visit Dr. Money, he would have annual visits to Dr. Money, and he didn't like going there. He and his brother had to participate in these visits as well. And they were made to physically inspect each other in their private areas. They were made to reenact certain sexual acts. There was some justification given for it, but nevertheless, to reenact them, not in a stage where they would mimic sexual acts. Let's be clear about this. They weren't forced to actually, perform an act, it's not any kind of fulfillment, but they would go through the motions, so to speak, maybe put it that way, and pretend they were going through these sexual acts. But again, these were young children. They were photographed doing this and so forth. By the time he was 13, Bruce Reimer, who was now given the name Brenda, was now known as Brenda Reimer, so disliked going to these annual checkups that he threatened to commit suicide if his parents took him there one more time. So they stopped. When the boy was 15, because of various reasons, the father actually broke up, actually told the girl, Brenda, that he had been born a boy. Obviously, this came in, there's no small news to him. He, shortly thereafter, rejected this identity that he was given of being a girl. Then underwent reversive surgery and male hormone treatments to try to become a boy again. But that did not help alleviate some of the psychological harm. He underwent a great deal of psychological difficulties over time. In 1997, when he was in his early 30s, he went public with all of this. Went to Rolling Stone. There was an article published in Rolling Stone, and he just lambasted money, created controversy about money, how he reported data. Here you've got questions about a scientist accurately or inaccurately reporting data. The question that occurs to me is, look, if you think you have the truth, and the truth is that we can decide this as opposed to any kind of a God having decided it for us, you should be comfortable with that. You should not be fearful of that. You shouldn't need to misreport data. And I don't know that it was proved or not proved, but anyways, that was the controversy at the time. The end of the story, however, gets even worse. His brother, the twin brother that had to go to these visits with him, also had experienced severe psychological problems over the years. Ended up committing suicide in his 30s. 2 years after he did that, Reimer, in 2004, I think it was 2004, Reimer himself the brother committed suicide in 2002, and then Reimer himself, Bruce Reimer, committed suicide in 2004. I think it was 38. I think it was, yeah. So here you've got this stellar spotlight case that proves the theory, and it ends this way. It ends this way. So my question simply is, where do we find the truth? Do we find the truth of St. Paul? I mean, look, if the truth is in St. Paul, we cannot decide who we are without some relation to God. We can create, we can make a lot of decisions about the direction of our lives. We can certainly do that. But we cannot give meaning to our lives. We cannot decide things for ourselves without having some connection to God. And if we do, we're denying reality. And if we're denying reality, chances are bad things are going to happen. So there are people out there, and this is still a very hot issue. And even though money has been discredited to some degree, there are a lot of people out there that still believe, look, we just haven't collected enough scientific data yet. We need to do more and more testing. We're going to find, maybe there are biological keys to why people have gender issues, why they identify one way or another, why they have doubts about themselves. Maybe we need to treat those. There's still a lot of debate about this. One section of this debate is, look, really what you're dealing with is a psychological issue. There's a professor, Kenneth Zucker, up at the University of Toronto, who's treated 560 cases of kids who have identified themselves or come to him saying, look, I was born this way, but I feel this way. And he said, by and large, it's the result of some kind of psychological trauma. You've got divorce, death of a sibling, some kind of a psychological issue, and then what happens instead is, these people have these problems. So what you need to do then is treat the psychological issue. And in these 560 cases, what he found doing that was that 98% of the time, the boys ended up being comfortable and they were fine being boys. And over 80% of the girls had a positive result. So where is the truth? Where is the truth? Perhaps Paul's on to something. Perhaps Paul knew something before we did. Usually that seems to be the case. But I don't know. I mean, I had there's a friend of mine. Did I mention this one already? The girl in sixth grade. Did I mention that? Not yet. So this friend of mine taught a girl in sixth grade. Girl started to dress as a boy. Parents supported this. The girl ended up having surgery to remove her breasts and so forth. And then later, years later, I think the child about 20, 21 years old has had reversive, is that a word? Reversive? I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to use it. Has had reversive surgery, but still is undergoing psychological problems. And she had a death there was a death of her father. Her mother ended up getting into a relationship with the younger man. Perhaps that was disquieting in some sense. I don't know. But there are, I heard about this one particular situation secondhand. It's unfair, to draw any conclusions, of course, about it. But, you still got the indicia or some of the circumstances that are similar to what this guy Zucker found, and he made a career of 30 years working on this. So again, where is the truth? Where is the truth? Perhaps it is, after all, with St. Paul. And perhaps we ought to be comfortable with who we are. And perhaps if we tend to be comfortable with who we are, we can feel more peace. And if we feel more peace in our lives, perhaps we'll be more comfortable extending maybe some peace and some love to other people, which at this time of the year, this Christmas time of the year, would not be a bad thing. That should be the message. Not be a bad thing. Anyways, this has been another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. We thank you very much for listening. We hope you will join us again next time when we consider another letter from Paul with something to say to America. Thank you. God bless. And Merry Christmas.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.